Hello, listeners. It's Donna here from the Resilience Movement. And, it's a very impromptu podcast today. I wanted to jump on and record this podcast because there's been a lot of talk about boundaries, setting boundaries, enforcing boundaries, all of those kinds of things. And I just want to share some really, powerful information that might be helpful, might not be helpful, who knows? And for those of you who are tuning in for the first time, the Resilience Movement, I am the founder, and the Resilience Movement came about in 2019 after I took a very long walk across Spain and realized that there is, lots of wisdom in me, lots of experience, and also I have amazing guests on here that can also share their wisdom and so forth. So, well, let's get started on this because I think it's an important topic and it's certainly very timely for many, many reasons. But, today we're talking about why some relationships don't survive your boundaries. And I'm sure you'll resonate at different times with what I'm going to share with you. And, as usual, these are just my opinions and my experiences. So take it or leave it, take what you will. But one of the hardest lessons I've learned in life is this: the people who really benefit from your lack of boundaries will often be the ones who are most upset when you finally create and, more importantly, enforce them. And when you finally do set boundaries, some relationships just will not survive. And today I want to talk about boundaries, but not the social media boundaries, not the version wrapped up in motivational quotes. I want to talk about the real version, the version that costs you something, right? Because boundaries do change things. They change dynamics, they change expectations, and they sometimes change relationships permanently. And for years, I was one of those people who let things slide. I let comments slide. I let behaviours slide. I let disrespect slide. And it wasn't really because I didn't notice it. It was because I wanted family moments. I wanted gatherings. And if I'm honest, it had kind of become the norm. So when something becomes normal, you stop questioning it. You can tell yourself that it's not worth the conflict, or that's just how they are. You don't make a big deal of it. But silence has a cost, and a long-term cost that eventually becomes too high. And I personally found this. So what are boundaries? What they actually are. It's one of the most misunderstood things in personal development. So people think boundaries are walls or punishment, control, pushing people away. Being controlling is one of the things about setting boundaries. But boundaries are actually about clarity. A boundary is simply this: the line where your self-respect becomes more important than someone else's comfort. Let me just say that again. The line where your self-respect becomes more important than someone else's comfort. And boundaries protect your emotional well-being, your dignity, your energy, your peace. Because let's face it, without boundaries, people slowly gain access to parts of your life that they never earned access to. That seat at the table, your time, your emotional space, your patience, your forgiveness, and sometimes your silence. So the truth is, most of us were never taught boundaries. I know I wasn't. And I think especially women were not taught boundaries. We're taught to be agreeable, to be kind, don't upset people, keep the peace. But keeping the peace often meant losing ourselves in the process. And, we also need to have boundaries at work. This was a lesson I learnt over periods of time, especially being in roles of responsibility and, corporate environments. So let's talk about boundaries in the workplace for a moment, because this is where many people first really begin to learn that they actually need them. Think about how often people tolerate things like being spoken over in meetings, unrealistic workloads, disrespect from leadership, also expectations to always being available. And we tolerate it because we want to be seen as professional, cooperative, easy to work with. We don't want to rock the boat. But eventually something happens, and I saw this. The more capable you are, the more you do to assist, the more is expected. And that's where boundaries are really important. So, but eventually sometimes there's moments where you think, this isn't okay anymore. And you finally say no, and suddenly you're perceived as difficult. Suddenly you've changed, or suddenly you're not a team player. And what actually happens is this: you stop tolerating behaviour that diminishes you. And that can feel a little uncomfortable as well. So boundaries are really hard at times, because the hardest boundaries can be with strangers. So not with people we love as much, family, friends, long-term relationships, because those boundaries force us to face difficult truths. Love and respect are not always the same thing. So you can love someone deeply and still need distance from them. You can care about someone and still recognize that their behavior hurts you. And sometimes people who struggle the most with boundaries are those who benefit most from you having none. And I've personally experienced that, because it's interesting that when I changed, everything around me started to change. And there's patterns over time. So boundaries rarely appear overnight. Boundaries build slowly as you start to grow and develop, as you decide that things are changing for you. And through patterns, little things, you recognize comments that don't sit right, the moments that make you feel uncomfortable, things you used to brush off, but you don't anymore, or you don't feel as okay to do that anymore. Eventually, when you step back and you look at the bigger picture, you start seeing a pattern clearly. And once that pattern is seen, it becomes really, really hard to ignore. I'll give you a personal story. I had a situation, and it was over years that there was repeated comments that made me feel uncomfortable. There was dismissive behaviour that I kind of fobbed off in the beginning, but then that just didn't feel right either. And then there were times for me to really celebrate my life, and this person didn't celebrate at all. In fact, didn't even want to know anything about it. And that made me feel uncomfortable. And some of these moments, singular, really don't seem like a big deal. It's when you put it all together that there was a pattern of behaviour. And it was over a period of time that that pattern just wasn't comfortable anymore. And it was one particular thing that happened. And you know that saying, the straw that breaks the camel's back? Well, that one particular incident was that straw that broke the camel's back. And that's when I went, I'm tired of being disrespected. I'm tired of being set aside, treated differently, even to the point where I was fat shamed. And a lot of it was really hurtful. And then there were a few moments that happened that were really disrespectful. So I had a combination of things: hurt, disrespect, and that feeling inside me that wasn't okay. And so that's where, putting those together, they created a pattern. And, sometimes something happens. And when that moment was brought together, when all of those moments were brought together, everything really got clear. And it wasn't necessarily because the last thing that happened was so bad, because it wasn't. It was when I had clarity on all of the other moments of, if you respected me, you probably wouldn't have done that. If you cared for my feelings, you probably wouldn't have done that. You would have had greater awareness. So I had to make that decision to no longer have people in my life who didn't respect me and who didn't treat me the way I wanted to be treated. And, COVID brought out an interesting dynamic in families, I think, at times. It wasn't always positive, and it wasn't always negative at that time. But there was a particular incident that happened around then that my boundaries became much clearer. And I'll tell you something that was really important about that moment. When I made that decision that I no longer wanted a relationship with this person, I had peace. I wasn't angry. I wasn't resentful. I just knew it changed. Something really deeply shifted inside me. And the old version of me was gone, because I would have brushed it off. But the version of me standing there that day didn't, because I had changed. And sometimes a boundary doesn't look dramatic. It's not a confrontation. It's not an argument. It's not a he said, she said. Sometimes a boundary is simply this: you stop reaching out, you stop explaining, you stop tolerating behaviour that leaves you feeling diminished. And for the first time, I chose distance instead of conflict. And something interesting happened instead of chaos. And that was where the peace came in. So there's something powerful that boundaries do in our lives. Boundaries act as a filter. So they filter out behaviour that you no longer accept. And sometimes they filter out people who were comfortable with the old version of you. And that can be confronting, especially when those people are family or close friends. So there's a cost to boundaries. And the truth is, people don't talk about this. Boundaries have a cost in the way of distance, misunderstanding, criticism, loneliness. But the alternative often costs even more. It costs you your self-respect, your emotional well-being, your peace, and eventually you reach a point where protecting your peace becomes more important than protecting the relationship. And like I said before, it's not an easy decision, it's a decision. And I'll tell you what boundaries give you. When boundaries are in place, something shifts. And it shifts in many aspects of your life, if not all aspects of your life. You begin to feel calmer, clearer, more grounded. You stop explaining yourself constantly. You stop shrinking to keep others feel comfortable. And life begins to feel more aligned. And so when you start to do that, it can be really uncomfortable for a while. And you can find other people in your circle wanting you to explain why you've made the decisions that you've made. But actually, you don't owe anyone an explanation other than yourself. So I want to go through 10 steps for you. Now, if you can't write these down because you're listening to this while you're driving, that's okay. You can pause it and go back to it later. So in the 10 steps to creating boundaries, notice how people make you feel. Do they drain your energy? or are they uplifting, or is it quite neutral? That's number one. So notice how people make you feel. Pay attention to patterns, right? There will be patterns that occur again and again and again, and you'll start to see them. Once you have that conscious awareness of something, you will have it. Just like when you decide to buy a car, you often see that car around because you are paying attention. Pay attention to patterns. 3, stop dismissing your instincts. Our intuition is a very, very powerful thing, and your instincts will tell you what's really going on, but you have to stop and listen to them. So don't dismiss your instincts. Stop, listen, and observe. Number 4, decide what behaviours you will no longer tolerate. And what's interesting is this is where the discomfort comes in for other people, because what was okay before is not okay now. And how you handle that is telling people, hey, when you do this, I feel this. And remember, that's about how you're feeling, not how they're making you feel. It's how you're feeling. No one can make you feel something. That's what's in you. So decide what you will no longer tolerate, and maybe you can have a conversation about how something makes you feel. In my situation, I couldn't because I wasn't heard. So what I decided to not tolerate anymore was not having that connection, not having that relationship. 5, communicate clearly when necessary. Just like I said before, when this happens, I feel a particular way, and I'd really like it if that didn't happen anymore. And 6 is expect resistance. And this is a big one. You've got to be strong because you are going to get resistance. When you change, everything around you starts to change, and resistance is one of those things. And I disconnected from someone 5 years ago, and I've had resistance from other people for that period of time. And that made it very difficult, but I was very comfortable in my decision. In fact, I had peace when I made my decision. 7, choose distance instead of constant conflict. All I can say is life is so short. And why do we want to have conflict? I have had conflict in my past for far too long, and I don't choose to have conflict in my life anymore. So choose distance instead of conflict, and stay in your integrity. That one is really easy for me, to stay in my integrity. And that could be my age. It could be my experience of what I've had to experience over the years. But that's certainly somewhere to stay. And protect your peace. Peace is everything. And especially in your own home. Peace is so important in your own home. And 10, accept that some relationships will change. Some relationships will end, and that's okay. So let me just run through them again without interruption. 1, notice how people make you feel. 2, pay attention to patterns. 3, stop dismissing your instincts. 4, decide what behaviour you will no longer tolerate. 5, communicate clearly when necessary. And 6, expect resistance, because you're going to get resistance. 7, choose distance instead of constant conflict. 8, stay in your integrity. 9, protect your peace. And 10, accept that some relationships will change. So one of the hardest truths about boundaries is peace has a price. And sometimes that price is distance from people you once loved deeply. I still love the people deeply, but I also choose peace. Peace is powerful because it allows you to live in alignment with who you truly are. So I want to ask you, before we finish, let me ask you a couple of questions. Think about the people in your life who leaves you feeling respected, supported, and valued, and who leaves you feeling diminished, drained, or disrespected. Where in your life are you currently tolerating behaviour that doesn't sit right with you, simply to keep the peace? And what might change in your life if you finally had the courage to create a boundary there? Let me leave you with this. My circle today is smaller than it used to be, but it's also much healthier. It's calmer and far more respectful. And sometimes that's the real gift that boundaries give us. So thank you for tuning in. I really appreciate your time listening. Please share this with anyone that you think would get benefit from it. And I look forward to having you listen to the podcast, hear from more amazing guests that I have coming up. Take care, stay strong, and be resilient.